Hello and welcome to episode 241 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. From 1960 we have Black Sunday, or The Mask of Satan. And it is now the beginning of October 2018, and going back through the history of this Epic Film Challenge 2 series, 2 years ago I did, I think, over 31 reviews for October, and then last year I did a handful, I think. I've done a lot of the horror movies that are in the book now, so there's not too much more to choose from. And then there's thrillers, which are kind of listed under separate genres in some cases in the book. But I still have a fair few horror films to get to, so I'm hoping to get to at least some of them throughout the month of October 2018. Now, I usually like to have natural light in these videos so it looks as good as possible, which I'm sure no one cares, but that's just me. It is currently 5:30 in the afternoon and it is almost pitch black outside. Like, the clouds have just come over and it's just got real grey and moody, so I had to turn the lights on, which isn't ideal. Anyway, we're here to talk about Black Sunday. Mario Bava, one of his first films, and I was not surprised to read that Mario Bava started his career in the 40s as a cinematographer, because this film feels like it was directed by a cinematographer, someone who knows how to use a camera, who knows how to capture a moment in the realm of the moving image. So Black Sunday is a dark gothic tale in the vein of kind of Dracula. It's kind of a vampire movie in some respects. There's shadows, there's kind of echoes of the Dracula stories in this one, but it is also a very loose adaptation of the Nikolai Gogol story V from, I think, 1835, which I've talked about in the form of the 1967 film made in Russia, and I think I did that last year, and that was a really cool horror movie. You could really dive into some of the inconsistencies with that, but I definitely can see where the loose framework of Black Sunday was inspired by V. But also it really feels to me like it was influenced by the Universal movies from the 30s as far as the look of this film. The kind of sets in the woods and the kind of the dark and moody atmosphere that's evoked with fog and the blackness of night and things like that. And kind of this sense of unease and creepiness that I think you can only really get through an outdoor set, if that makes any sense whatsoever. I just love those kinds of moody sets where you can tell that's not a real location, you can tell that's not a real forest, but it has this kind of heightened sense of spookiness to it if you light it correctly. And I believe that in this film they had everything in the film kind of built in monochrome, so it would even more suit the look of black and white film. There are some on-location stuff on this film as well, so you do kind of get to see the difference, but majority of it is on set. And I think for me, what really makes this film shine, what really makes this film stand out, is the production design, the art design, and the cinematography. The acting is probably its weakest point, and the story maybe too, in the sense that the story is something we've seen before, we've seen many times since. It isn't too gripping as far as, oh, what's going to happen? You know, I'm just sitting there enjoying the visual feast that this movie is. And honestly, I really wasn't expecting much from this film. When it first started, we open 200 years before the events of the majority of the movie with this witch, this Satanist, played by Barbara Steele, getting burnt basically at a stake, but also to kind of add to that kind of very conventional image of a witch being burnt at the stake, they place an iron mask over her face, and this iron mask has kind of needles and nails on the inside of it. And they don't just place this onto her face, they place it onto her face and they hammer it into her fucking skull. It is a brutal image. This film was banned in the UK when it was initially released. Took many years for it to be seen and then recut, and then it was released uncut many decades later. And I can see from the perspective of a 1960s audience why this film would be seen as too extreme for some countries, because this is before the era of The Thing and Day of the Dead, which are two films I would consider the greatest of all time when it comes to gruesome, gory, horror, practical effects. Like, those two are the high bar. And at this point in time, I think it was maybe not as common. I'm not sure, I'm no horror movie expert, but the effects in this film, sparingly as they may be, are absolutely top notch. There's some really, really great stuff. And I'm not one who gravitates towards the kind of gory genre either, but I really appreciated how these very realistic effects made the movie so much better. Like when the body of the witch is found 200 years later in her tomb, and I love the idea that the tomb had over the coffin a glass plate over her face, over the iron mask, and above that kind of pane of glass was a cross, because they believed that a visible cross needed to be kind of next to her face at all times to keep her kind of spirit and soul at bay, which is a really cool idea. And of course it gets broken, the cross gets smashed, and then the mask gets pulled out. And you see this woman's face, Barbara Steele's face, but with the eyes sunken completely and bugs coming out of it, and it looks very realistic and very gruesome. And throughout the film, it begins to kind of come back, reanimate very, very slowly. The eyeballs start pushing up through the skull, and it's just incredible. And so I thought that the effects really helped the film, and it wasn't a film that was completely reliant on the effects, but it's a film that was greatly enhanced by those effects. It's a great film to look at. It has this moody atmosphere to it, and again, the acting, the version I saw was dubbed in English. I know it was shot in English, but the Italian actors, their accents were quite thick, and then they redubbed it. So I know there's an Italian version, there's an English version, there's a shorter 83-minute cut called The Mask of Satan. So there's a few different versions floating around there. I'd like to get the Arrow Video Blu-ray release, actually, because I think they just re-released it this year, because I'd love to see the different versions, actually. So for me, this has become one of my favorite horror films, I think. I don't think I'd watch it over and over again. It's not like something like The Thing, but it's one that really surprised me. And the story I don't really need to go into too much, but it's about, again, the witch who kind of gets burnt at the stake, and her brother, who also gets kind of condemned to a fate with an iron mask over his face. And then 200 years later, we follow two doctors who go into this village, and they just happen upon the tomb, awaken the kind of evil within, and then there's a family. And here's the real interesting bit, though. There's a family who are the descendants of the witch and her brother. And so what we get in that kind of 200 years later setting is a woman who looks identical to the witch from the beginning of the film. So Barbara Steele plays two different roles. And it's about the witch who is kind of trying to reanimate herself, wanting the blood and the body of her ancestor who could give her that beauty again, and let her embody this hate inside her again. There are some cool ideas in the film as far as the dialogue and some of the deeper meanings. Not too much, though. I would liken this film, Black Sunday, it's almost what Blade Runner is to sci-fi films, as far as a creepy, spooky, atmospheric, gothic horror film. It just visually, I think it just is almost peerless. And it's not just the way that it's shot, but it's the production design and the way that Bava used the camera, kind of floating, gliding through these rooms of the castle, and just showing every inch of that incredible production design. Like, it just feels so real, even if you can tell it's a set at times. Just the lighting and some of the deaths, there's some really creepy kind of effects used. And also, one of my favorite effects in the film is a very simple one. It's near the end of the film when the witch is trying to sap the life out of her younger ancestor, and we see her face. She's kind of writhing around. The face kind of begins to change into a more aged face, but the aging effect isn't some elaborate makeup. It's very simple, just deceptively simple stuff, where it's just lines across the face and kind of maybe just highlighting the cheekbones a bit more. But what's so incredible to me is that I would expect that effect to be done where they would shoot the actress like completely still, put the makeup on, shoot it again, and then fade in, and you might be able to see that they're fading, but it still looks kind of cool. In this film, the aging makeup just appears on her face out of nowhere, and she's writhing around as it's happening. I have no idea how they did it. I kind of don't want to know, because to see a movie that was made in the 60s and to be kind of stumped on how they pulled off an effect, I think is something really cool, and I really want to hold on to it. And I thought that was great. Now, the acting, the dub obviously wasn't that good. Some very stilted deliveries at times, and a lot of it doesn't clearly match the mouths. I know that that's kind of almost a common thing with Italian horror films, with the English dubs and so on. for me it's always weird because I want to watch the original language at all possible times, but then I'll see an Italian film in Italian, but I can see that the mouths are speaking English that are almost matching the subtitles I'm reading, so it really throws me for a loop. I'm still unsure how to really fully approach these Italian horror movies, but for me, this definitely is a sign that I need to see more of Mario Bava's work. Barbara Steele, I know, is a very famous kind of figure in the kind of horror pantheon of kind of female performers, and this was one of the films that kind of launched her career in many ways, I think. And she has a great face. There's a very beautiful face. She's a very beautiful woman, but when she's the witch, especially in the final moments of the film where she's really kind of using her face to express these things, it's a really haunting performance, even if for me the dubbing wasn't very convincing with the acting. So, for me it doesn't matter that this film isn't really great with the acting and the story isn't incredible and had me guessing, till the very last moment, but even though I could see where it was going beat to beat, I just loved being in that world and seeing this visual wonder of, again, a genre that I'm not even that big of a fan of. I know so many people who love horror movies, and I've actually seen people I know who love horror movies think this is just okay. For me, I think it was incredible, just from a visual standpoint. One of my favorite parts of the whole film, another one of my favorite parts is when a character dies, and we see this character's relatives running into the room to see the dead person. And the camera is set above the dead body, facing towards the door. The door opens, the relatives run in, they see, the dead body, and we, the audience, see it at the exact same time as the camera pans down very quickly, but also then spins around 180 degrees so that we're seeing the face in the correct kind of, so it's not upside down. And so the way that the camera is like, it's a really complicated move. I don't know if they kind of tricked it and kind of cut with the whip, but it's just such a great cinematic device that just showed you what they were seeing in a way, but from a different angle. I love the cinematography in this film. And another thing I loved is a moment where there's a young girl who's milking a cow in this very elaborate kind of barn set, and then the camera follows her. She hears this noise. She goes over to the kind of a gap in the barn. She looks through the barn, and there's a huge set beyond it. Just the scope of it is so impressive. So obviously this wasn't a major kind of studio producing this film, so I'm not sure how much of a budget they had, but it's clearly quite hefty, and it really shows in almost every frame of this film. So for me, I loved it. Is it a film you should see before you die? I think it is, just for the way this film looks, the effects. There's a scene where like a character kind of bursts out of a grave, and just the kind of way that the ground was rumbling, great atmosphere in this film, and sometimes that can really carry a film that doesn't have great acting into one that's still memorable and still one you probably should see.